as we continue, I am happy, and very proud to, well, again, I don't have to present to you really Giusto Traina in a workshop on the 420s. He literally famously wrote a book about, well, things that are also partly connected to what we are talking today, the brilliant 428 and so many other works that you, of course, all know. Giusto is at the University of Sorbonne and at the same time at Università del Salento. Now you are in Italy, joining us virtually from your Italian incarnation, I think. Thank you very much, Giusto. The talk will be the Tractus Armeniae before and after, there you have it, 428, a new reading of a Theodosian novel 5:3. I invite you, Giusto, to share your presentation.
So, just a short disclaimer. My maps are usual maps everyone uses, but I was not aware that Amir had good maps, so I will contact him later. So that's let's start. Are you seeing all this? Okay. Fergus Miller considered this constitution. Now you can have a read by yourself, but we will go on quoting all the passages as an example of the problems Theodosius II had to manage in managing the empire, having to pay attention to countless messages, as Fergus said, from distant frontiers concerning matters which in their own way were just as complex as the theological disputes that demanded his attention. The measures taken by Theodosius II, already considered in two valuable papers by the Constantin Zuckerman and Sylvain Jagnard, well intended to strengthen the defensive system, and therefore directly concerned the safety of the provincials. It was therefore a way of justifying the use of new measures that obliged the possessores, who in the last 50 years had obtained land once belonging to the Arsacids of Armenia, to comply with a series of measures necessary to strengthen the defensive system. A requirement later reiterated by the expression pro utilitate communi. Even if the Constitution does not expressly state it, the type of services listed shows that the obligations to which the possessores were bound responded to essentially military requirements. The legislator's message implies the need to protect both the assets of the possessores and their physical safety, thus justifying the services provided for in the constitution addressed to the powerful dignitary Cyrus, already prefect of Constantinople, who held the office of Praetorian prefect for the East from 439. In 441, the date of the constitution, he was also consul without a colleague. The report sent by Cyrus to Theodosius II was evidently a direct consequence of the emergency situation created by the Persian attack in 440. After the peace of 422, the map is from Maximiuk, and the Treaty of Peace dating from 427 or 428, which caused the end of the kingdom of Persia Armenia, the situation on the frontier remained calm until about 440, when a coalition of Persians, Caucasian peoples, people called Huns, Arabs and Isaurians plundered the Roman lands. The operations are remembered as a treaty violation by Theodoretus, ecclesiastic history, as you can see it, and by Moses Khorenatsi 367, who mentioned the attack on Armenia by troops stationed in more or less Azerbaijan, and dates these operations to the beginning of the reign of Yazdgerd II, therefore at around 438. On the other hand, the main attack against the Romans had been launched at Nisibis, since Khorenatsi speaks of an attack on the sanctuary city of Bagavan, located east of Theodosiopolis under the direct control of the Sassanians. It is possible that these operations were intended to prevent the Armenian subjects of the Persian Empire from joining the Romans, a sign of a possible resumption of hostilities by Theodosius II himself. In any case, the Persian attack justified the subsequent measures taken to protect the Tractus Armeniae. It is likely that the control of these territories located almost at the border, but not cultivated by Limitanei, fell to the military administration. In his study, Zuckerman emphasizes the importance of the context. In his reconstruction, the res privata would have acquired these lines as bona caduca, but the context would rather suggest bona vacantia, and in any case, it is not possible to speculate further, so much for the lovers of administrative and economic late Roman Empire. In a sector at the edge of the empire, the term tractus would seem to apply to the intermediate zone between the limites and Persian territory. Two novellae of Theodosius mention a tractus extending throughout the east, so novella 4 and 5-2, which in this particular case is limited to the border with the territory of Persia Armenia, recently annexed to the Sasanian Empire. Jagnard suggests that in late antiquity, the term tractus indicated a geographical area under the jurisdiction of a civil and military administrative official. The military aspect of the term is more evident by several passages of Ammianus. In general, it seems that in the administrative language, tractus tends to define a variable area, which can involve different administrative or military districts. Examining its various meanings, Jagnard proposed a progressive semantic evolution of tractus, which would have acquired the technical meaning of zone of actual or possible operations. In fact, as Blockley had already realized, between 363 and 420, the Roman and rival empires gradually established a demarcation line, as it is also shown by the regulation of the movement of merchants attested by constitution, usually dated to 408, 409, in my opinion, between 408 and 414. The list of subsequent provisions regarding requisitions shows that the restructuring of the tractus Armeniae, the tractus Armeniae involved strengthening the road system and the imperial presence. This was a timely intervention in a territory threatened by incursions, which preceded the subsequent measures to strengthen the army's movement to the detriment of the system of the cursus publicus. At the same time, its connotation as a tractus suggests a particular regime where the Roman army could intervene even before the peace treaty of 387, since these territories belonged to a friendly and allied kingdom. It is not clear when the territories of Western Armenia came under the full control of the Roman provincial system. Procopius indicates that after the treaty was signed, the Romans placed the country under the control of a comes Armenia. The term limes could here indicate more generally the border of the Sasanian Empire, which in fact, after the Treaty of 428 and the definitive acquisition of Pers Armenia by the Persians, had evidently been fixed to the east of Theodosiopolis. The participle constitutum, interpreted as situated, actually means fixed, established, or instituted, and therefore implies a reference to the creation of the tractus that had determined the new fiscal measures. The region was located in the upper Euphrates valley, along which the road normally used for Roman expeditions to Armenia ran, and where probably later the army of Heraclius also passed, and it was only equally important for international trade routes. This artery crossed Anatolia to reach the Commercium of Artaxata. As for the surrounding territories, the situation was still particularly confused, even in the mid-6th century. Theodosiopolis, present-day Erzurum, at an earlier period bore the Armenian name of Karin, whence the name Karenitis, already known by Strabo and Pliny the Elder. Under Theodosius the first or the second, it was enlarged and renamed Theodosiopolis. The foundation is generally attributed to the second Theodosius, but other clues could lead us to think it was Theodosius the first. The problem is that the site is not mentioned in the Notitia Dignitatum, and according to Procopius, it was Theodosius the Great who elevated the site to the rank of polis. The citadel did, however, play a strategic role starting from the war of 421-22 against the Persians. Therefore, it is not impossible that the works began under the first Theodosius and were completed under Theodosius II. So much for all the Armenologists, even the great scholar as the late Nina Garsoyan, who tried to systematize the session in the usual way to criticize the historical value of Moses Khorenasi. And Procopius, for the later period attributes important fortification wars to Anastasius and recalling the defensive and offensive function of the city. As for the Satala, the ancient Roman garrison home to the 15th Legio Apollinaris, whose prefect was in command of the Dux Armenia, was located about 190 kilometers west of Theodosiopolis. According to Jagnard, the territories of the two cities would represent the western and eastern borders of the tractus Armeniae in question. In my opinion, the military sector corresponding to the part of Armenia already under Roman control must have been larger, but the problems faced by the legislator seem to have arisen in a more circumscribed area, adjacent to the territories of the two cities. It is likely that the elevation of Satala to the rank of civitas is contemporary to the reorganization of the border system after the Treaty of 387. A.H.M. Jones had linked the fundi regales that had belonged to the Arsacids of Armenia to the more usual category of fundi limitrofi. And this was followed by Whitby, who considered these possessions as lands assigned to the Limitanei and coveted by other citizens. According to Zuckerman, the Tractus Armenia was an enclave located between the province of Pontus Polemaniacus and the Transcaucasian satrapies. In my opinion, it's more likely that by Tractus Armenia is meant the whole area adjacent to the Sasanian Armenia, while the petitions that had led to the Praetorian prefect requesting an imperial opinion had been addressed by possessores of lands adjacent to Satala and Theodosiopolis. The imperial munificentia was granted after several petitions had been formulated by some private citizens who had taken advantage of the end of Arsacid rule in the Armenian sector controlled by Constantinople. The studies that have dealt with this constitution identify the canon mutato pristito canon, with the expected land tax. Jagnard suggests that the indication of a variation from the previously established canon refers to the clauses that imply the services required of the possessores, understood as a form of a permanent bond. However, there is a problem. The text seems to refer to the situation prior to the standardization of the taxation of the fundi regales. One, therefore, has the impression that the legislator is trying to adapt to Roman legal terminology and a situation concerned with the Arsacid legal system. Before the Tractus, Armenia was subjected to the same conditions as the other provincial territories. The term canon is therefore ambiguous, because in addition to the technical meaning of fee, it also seems to imply an original meaning of system, alluding to the tax system established by the kings of Armenia. However, it is not clear how these land assets passed from the Armenian crown to the Roman Empire, nor whether they were confiscated or ceded territories. The Constitution shows the need to adapt the regime of lands already subject to a different regime to Roman law. The various possible scenarios listed by Jagnard are reasonable but not sufficiently supported by the sources. We cannot therefore assume that the Roman fiscal system had already been introduced before 441 in the territories of Armenia Interior that did not fall under the fundi regales. Probably the intervention of the legislator allowed for the integration into the register of the lands that had escaped the calculation, the reckoning of property. In late antique legal sources, the term possessio can refer to both property and real rights assimilated to property, such as usufructus, ius perpetuum, or emphiteusis. Of course, there are considerable differences between the simple possessor, rusticus or colonus, and the possessor privileged by an imperial donation and endowed with extensive immunity. On the other hand, possessiones in plural is used as a synonym for fundi or predia. Ultimately, the term possessio had variable characteristics and often referred to a medium-sized piece of land, without necessarily implying fiscal aspects. In the case of the Tractus Armeniae, it seems that the ancient lands that belonged to the Arsacids of Armenia acquired the fundi patrimoniales. I will end my paper with some observations about the terminology used for the corvée. We have to consider the Latin word contatus, synonymous with contarius, that also already occurs in Vegetius' military treatise, and gives and is also the equivalent of the Greek kontophoros, spear-bearer, and Zuckerman correctly suggested the reference to the Armenian cataphract cavalry, the Nizaka work, but it thought it referred to the kind of corvée that consisted of recruiting cataphract cavalrymen. However, Jagnard observed that it is unlikely that Armenian nobles could have been considered as local militia or recruits. It is not clear which troops were involved. Jones thought they were irregular militia. We should discount the fanciful interpretation of former professor in Lille, Roland Delmer, who transcribed the term as contadi and interpreted the term as ox goaders, so people who had to goad the oxen in order to push them on the road. Well, okay, let's dismiss this interpretation. Another interesting term is bastaga. It's a cult of the Greek bastagier, indicating the act on transporting, and possibly the bastagari transport the products purchased in commercial centers. And in fact, these goods could have come from Armenia, where Roman merchants could not go beyond the ancient royal residence of Artaxata. As for paraveredus, this is a hybrid lemma formed from the Greek para and the Latin, but it's a term is of a Celtic origin, veredus, horse. As it seems, it was a reserve horse used for the cursus publicus. As for the species, the technical meaning is commodities, provisions, and the term coemptio, unlike the use made of it by jurists in classical age, took on value in the technical language of late antique taxation in reference to the purchase of goods on behalf of the empire, where the required service could be obtained at a low price. See the well-known passage by the anonymous Rebus Bellicis, where the exactores sent by unjust and rapacious governors speculated on both the tironum comparatio and the equorum vel frumenti coemption. And we can find an interesting scene in the colloquium of Celtis, where imperial officials also deal with equi probabilis. That's a last remark about the secundum pristinam consuetudinem. The vocabulary of the novella used the concept of ancient custom, where the reference to the past is expressed with different adjectives. Here, pristinas, in other constitutions, we will find vetus, prisca, and it is used in reference to Roman legal tradition. And Vegetius also used the term consuetudo in relation to requisitions. So, so much for the reading of this constitution that can help also to consider a very elastic use of an otherwise official terminology in the case of frontier territories, as was the situation of the frontier of the former Arsacid Armenia controlled by the Romans, that very soon, even with a special status, was annexed to the provincial system. It is worth noting that for this period, not all the constitution of the Theodosianus, Codex Justinianus, and the Novella must be used as normal pieces of legislation, but especially when it comes to this frontier situation that were very fuzzy until Justinian tried to put an end of all these contradictions. So this is another interesting of the 5th century. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Giusto. And we immediately open the floor for questions. I see that there is already one question online. Well, why don't we start right away? Let's, Amir, since you can connect, I think it's always better to see a person and to hear a person than to read.
Right.
Well, okay, so Yes, Amir, this is a good question. In fact, what we know about the Armenian taxation has been studied by Banandian, and all these texts are a bit later. In fact, in Khorenatsi, we have some hints at the situation of the former taxation when Armenian was a tributary system. For the rest, this is very simple. I tried to study all the evidence for NSC in a former article that was published more or less 20 years ago, but this is in French. So maybe I should, you know, English now, it's the mainstream sources. Sometimes is very difficult to find this publication, especially when it's not immediately available. And Patrick?
Patrick, yes, please go ahead. And if you can show, if you have a camera, that's good, but go ahead anyways. Can you hear us, Patrick? Apparently not. Well,
probably has an issue on his side.
Maybe yes, that's an issue on his side. Maybe he will come back to us. Yes, go please, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Giusto. That was very interesting. I wonder, is there almost exactly 100 years after what we're talking about, the legislation of Theodosius, we have the revolt in Armenia against the defection of the Armenians who are criticizing Justinian's measures. They're very unhappy. And one of the things that's raised, one of the issues raised in their complaints is to do with taxation, and that they claim there's a deal, if I'm not wrong, about when the Arsacids sort of hand over, when the Romans take over, that there's some sort of sweet deal for the ruling family, for the Arsacids, almost in exchange for the handover. It isn't usually believed, but do you think it's possible to associate this piece of legislation with people, there's a transfer of ownership and tax liabilities that's perhaps people have taken over from the Arsacids, that they're unhappy? Any thoughts on that? Could it be something?
Yeah, the problem about the constitution is that we don't know who these people were. If we go a little bit into fantasy, we can imagine that these new possessores were not necessarily Armenians. And the situation of the fundi regales was quite the same. When we know from Justinian's novelle, a couple of novelle, the situation of the Arsacids, who still had some estates and land, we understand that the situation was not completely clear. And I would also add that another point we found in Khorenatsi is interesting because Khorenatsi is reflecting the interests of the Arsacids in Roman Armenia. It's very difficult to understand what is, as you already know. I think that it's the way as mainstream terminologists handle Khorenatsi, it's a bit unfair, and not before I believe in Khorenetsi, but because we can understand what was his ideological term. And on the other hand, we don't have to forget that on both sides of the frontier, we had a sort of military aristocracy in the same way as it happened in the 18th century. So specialized, skilled militaries, often from the same families, who can serve either Byzantium or the Persians, no matter what, because that they were also linked by other kinds of interest. I tried to gather all the evidence. I think that, of course, we need to reconsider many observations made by Nikolai add-ons, but nonetheless, the real problem is understand what happened in the 5th century. We know a lot about the 6th century. We know also the situation. There is another book in Italian by the late Giuliana Lanata, who studied very well all the situation of this border people within Justinian. But Justinian idea was in fact, Justinian was for the cosmos. He tried to put all the subjects of the Roman Empire on the same basis, whereas Theodosius was very aware that it was actually impossible. So the solution is, we use the same language, the language of the legislator, and we use ambiguous terms in order to give the false idea that that the situation was completely under control. That was not the case.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Patrick, he came back to me because there were problems with the sound. So I just copied, can you, just a second, everyone, I'm copying his question, and I will also read it so that everyone sees it. I noticed that, so it's from Patrick Stupniewicz. I noticed that a minor comment digression. Contus, contus,
yes,
contarian.
no, this is Jagnard idea. I think that now that can be a solution, but on the other hand, when we have an Armenian term at Nizakavor and the use of the spear bearers, we also find in Cassius die in a context referring to the end of the 1st century BCE. I'm not sure we can consider the Contatus Contaries necessarily as local militia. That was the idea of several scholars. In my opinion, we have to consider the former situation and the fact that at a certain moment these contati passed under the jurisdiction of the Comes Armeniae. And the problem is, was the Comes Armenia an Armenian? That's what I believe.
I think there is a continuation, Patrick. You are posting it all just to me and not to the common site, so I'm recopying it to the general's chat. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, but in fact, we don't forget that Pompeius Strogos and then Justin were trying to adapt to their language some particular ways. In the same way that Justin says that they were slaves, and he was alluding to the Persian bandak. That this, of course, had a term indicating subjection, but not necessarily the same idea of slave as it was conceived in the Mediterranean world. So, on the borders, we don't need to be always so tranchant. Sometimes we have to consider all the possibilities. Okay.
All right. Yes, we have, Jan has a question. Go ahead, please.
Yes, so I'm just I was sort of thinking about we talked about sort of these surrendered article lands and how they were treated, and presumably church lands got the same treatment. I'm wondering about these sort of noble families along the border, where you have, you know, family members on one side and the other, and of course any any significant event, like creates a cascade of fleeing noblemen from one direction to another. And do we see any sort of reactions to these attempts at reconstructing it from the families? And what do we do with a territory where, say, a family is run off to the Persian side, or people who take the opportunity to move on?
Yes, thank you. I think we have evidence for the 6th century, but not for the 5th. I'm not sure we can add the categories of the 6th century as add-ons did to the 5th as well. We have to consider that, because I'm not sure that Roman Armenia was completely occupied by Armenians. We had two civitates, that is Satala and Theodosiopolis, and I'm sure that Theodosius did his best to try to implement the territory with not Armenian citizens. That was, I think, it can be implied in the constitutions. Then, from a point of view of a Roman legislature, we have possessores, no matter what their origin was.
Yes, because I think, for example, like the Bagrationi, you see, I was thinking, for example, you know, like families like the Bagrationi and the Granuni, who you see.
Sorry, please articulate. I'm not very used to British English.
Well, yes, and I'm not an especially clear speaker. I was thinking about like the families such as the Bagrationi or the Granuni.
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, but this we found it in 6th century sources, and but on the other hand, what do we know? Not much.
This is a good question.
That's wonderful, I think, free conclusion of part of the discussion.
Yeah. Well, I think primarily like epic histories in the sense of an earlier source that depicts these families circulating in this period.
All right. Thank you so very much, Giusto. Really, thank you for being with us this morning. I know you are maybe have other engagements in the afternoon, so really many
Yes,
thanks for joining us
Jal.
in the morning and given this such a rich presentation. And we have here, I'm sorry for all our online participants, we cannot really invite them for lunch, but this is what we will do now.